Hello, everyone. I'm Clara Blessing. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Radboud University, Nijmegen. And along with my colleagues Elina Mester, who's a PhD at Ghent University, and Alexander Ulrich Thulsen, who is a lecturer at Aarhus University, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Memory and Activism Working Group. And so I'd like to very warmly welcome you to the first of two events in which people from within the working group share their perspectives on the Memory and Activism Nexus. Before I introduce the event a little bit more, just some practical matters. Your mics and cameras will be activated for the Q&A, and the event is being recorded. So these are just some things to bear in mind. So the Memory and Activism Working Group was set up a few years ago as one of the Memory Studies Association's working groups. And this is our first kind of more formally organised event. More informally, we host monthly reading groups. We have a presence at the MSA, including at the last MSA in Lima, a walking tour. And we want to invite you all who are here to stay in touch and to keep up with the working group, because ideas for other events to organise through the working group or any issue you'd be interested in discussing to do with memory and activism are always really welcome. Discussions of the relationship between memory and activism have really animated the field of memory studies in recent years, and this focus has led to the publication of a large number of monographs, special issues, and edited volumes on this subject. Social Movements, Cultural Memory and Digital Media, edited by Sam Merrill, Emily Kitely and Priska Daffy. Remembering Social Movements, edited by Stefan Berger, Sean Scalmer and Christian Vick. Or Jenny Wustenberg and Yifat Gutman's impressive and enormous Routledge Handbook to Memory Activism, to name but a few. Indeed, at the 2023 Memory Studies Association conference, Red Chigi introduced the idea of an activist term in memory studies. The liveliness of this subject is such that, since issuing our call for papers, the journal Memory Studies has published an entire special issue entitled Remembering Activism, Explorations in the Memory-Activism Nexus, which is co-edited by Sam Merrill and Anne Rigney. And we encourage those of you who are interested in this subject to have a look at that publication. It's open access and includes 12 articles tracing entanglements between memory work and activism, and covering the means and ends of remembering activism. As they say in the editorial, as the editors say in the editorial, on the one hand, thinking about studies of grassroots attempts to change memory, and on the other hand, thinking of studying the role of memory in grassroots attempts to change the world. So as a working group, we hope to contribute to these vibrant debates, and we're doing so today by organising a panel, the first of two, around debates on the memory activism nexus. We'd very much like to thank the dMSA for letting us use their platform to do this. This first session will be thinking about the memory of activism, thinking through questions of how activism from the past is recollected. And so on this note, I'm delighted to introduce our first of three speakers today, who is Vasiliki Belia. Vasiliki is a PhD candidate at Maastricht University. Her research interests include gender studies, comic studies, cultural memory, and social movements. And her project, funded by the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, studies contemporary comics that remember figures and campaigns from 20th century feminism. She has published 2 open access peer-reviewed articles, one this year in Memory Studies and last year in MAI, Feminism and Visual Culture, alongside a book chapter on this subject. And Vasiliki has also curated the exhibition Graphic Sapphic Lesbian Comics from the United Kingdom and the Netherlands between the 1970s and 1990s at the ILIA LGBT Heritage in Amsterdam, which I myself went to and really enjoyed. So her presentation today is titled The Woman Rebel, Remembrances of Margaret Sanger's Reproductive Rights Activism in Peter Bagg and Sabrina Jones' Comic Biographies. So I'll hand over to you now, Vasiliki.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Clara. So let me start. And my apologies if I'm looking at another screen while reading out my notes. This is very much still a work in progress, what I will present today. So yeah, it is about Margaret Sanger. I will give you some introduction on who she is before I talk about the books, the comic books that the comic book biographies about her. So on the website of Planned Parenthood, one can find resources for discussion and reflection published on the occasion of the organization's centenary. Among them,
should you be sharing your screen?
oh yes, I am sharing it.
Can other people see the screen? No, I can't see it.
No, we
Oh,
cannot
no.
see the screen.
Sorry.
Can you?
Yes, I will try once
Thank you.
more. Let's do it again. How about now?
Yeah, we can see the screen now.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Clara. So looking at the website of Planned Parenthood, you can find resources for discussion and reflection published on the occasion of the organization's centenary that was already 8 years ago. Among them, a resource is dedicated to its founder, Margaret Sanger. In it, Sanger is described as a woman of heroic accomplishments, and like all heroes, also complex and imperfect. Margaret Sanger was the most well-known leading figure of the movement for birth control in the USA and globally from the 1910s until her death in 1966. Fighting the Comstock law that forbade public discussion about sex and contraception, she made strategic use of media and controversy to bring the topic high on public discussions indeed. She opened the first birth control clinic in the USA, which later became Planned Parenthood, and established a center for the research and dissemination of knowledge around contraception. Starting as a socialist with a radical idea of women's freedom and self-actualization, she turned to strange bedfellows in the 1920s to ensure the success of her campaign. These included an upper middle-class medical establishment and supporters of eugenics whose ideas and methods enjoyed greater respect and acceptance at the time than Sanger's own cause did. While using eugenic ideas to advance her arguments, however, her agenda promoted women's sexual and legal equality against the eugenic mainstream. Post-World War II, Sanger lobbied for the inclusion of birth control in international policies regarding population and development. And in her work with Planned Parenthood, she drove the research for the development of the birth control pill. Sanger is so closely associated with the movement for birth control and with Planned Parenthood, which is the leading provider of abortion services in the USA today, that her memory is at the center of debates around reproduction rights as a site of contestation. A figure without much salience for political debates between the 1940s and the 1960s, Sanger was remembered again in the 1970s when, in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, religious right organizations coalesced around a right to life movement aiming to revert the authority to prohibit abortion to states and even achieve a federal prohibition on abortion. Even though Sanger was against abortion, she was a useful figure in this battle because of her association with eugenics. The idea that voluntary abortion was equivalent to eugenics was the glue that united improbable allies in the 1970s. Black nationalists on the one hand and evangelicals, fundamentalists, and Catholics on the other. The image of Sanger as a villain created by Catholics in the 1920s was resurrected again with this coalition and used as evidence that feminism and state-enforced eugenics are one and the same thing. Just to note that the American Catholic left was one of the few loud voices against eugenics in the 1920s, but also that the Catholic Church was one of the loudest voices against contraception and the rights of women to self-determination at the time. In the 1970s, when this was happening, second-wave feminists appreciated Sanger as a woman who placed women's sexual and moral liberation from patriarchal and religious institutions to the forefront of her political agenda. In my presentation today, I focus on two comics biographies of Sanger, Peter Bag's Woman Rebel, The Margaret Sanger Story, published in 2013, and Sabrina Jones' Our Lady of Birth Control, a cartoonist's encounter with Margaret Sanger, published in 2016. They came out in a decade that saw not only the intensification of the use of Sanger as a symbol for the eugenic intentions of abortionists by the religious right, but also the raising of voices that criticize Sanger's legacy from within feminism. Since 2015, there have been many initiatives led by religious right groups to remove monuments of Sanger from public spaces and universities. Conservative women who want to carve a space for themselves within feminism participate in the demonization of Sanger too. But Sanger seems to have also lost support of mainstream feminism. In 2020, Planned Parenthood of Greater New York removed Sanger's name from the Manhattan Health Center as a public commitment to reckon with its founders' harmful connections to the eugenics movement. This move reflects a shift from defending Sanger as a protector of bodily autonomy and self-determination towards reckoning with her association with white supremacist groups and eugenics, a shift that promises to address Sanger's legacy in the organization and the way it affects people of color today. This organizational shift in Planned Parenthood is the result of a greater decades-long shift within feminism and the political cultural prevalence of intersectional feminism, which distrusts single-issue goals and strategies and requires self-reflection and accountability from individuals and organizations that focusing on single issues have failed groups that have historically been at the periphery of mainstream feminism. To quote Manon Parry, although some have worried about the misuse of historical work to limit reproductive health care, honest assessments of the past, including, for example, acknowledgement of coercive and controversial practices, are important for presenting future abuses and for politicizing difficult histories. Yet it is important to also be wary of the move of using so-called feminist bad objects as scapegoats to soak feminism's purity or righteous direction towards an ideal completeness. And this, the last part, is quoting Nas and Pinto, not Manon Parry anymore. So the two books celebrate Sanger's resistance to dominant institutions controlling women's sexuality while addressing her support for eugenics and racist ideologies. They largely defend Sanger's work and respond to her critics, yet without fully turning a blind eye to her faults. They create, I want to argue, layered accounts of Sanger that counter the flattening of nuance around Sanger's memory. Both are based on extensive research, yet they are popular biographies in a multimodal medium bound to attract a different readership than a purely text-based biography. They can be read by people of diverse literacies, people whose disabilities can make reading text-based only books challenging to read, or simply people who are used to the dominance of visuality common in social media. The books are also sold in locations frequented by readers different than those who would normally look for biographies or books on history. Bagge and Jones's book differ significantly. Bagge's work is closer to a conventional biography with a focus on Sanger's life from the beginning to the end, whereas Jones's work, according to herself, is a kind of monument erected by a mnemonic stakeholder because Jones herself was a reproductive rights activist and she has received a sex education in a Planned Parenthood clinic. And Jones does not only discuss parts of Sanger's life, she also directly addresses her legacy in the political context of contemporary debates about reproductive rights. Moreover, while Bagge's over-the-top cartooning and sarcastic humor establish a distance between the narrator of the story and its subject, Jones expresses an emotional connection with her heroine, intertwining Sanger's story with her own work as a reproductive rights activist during the anti-feminist backlash of the Reagan era. While Bagge's regular layout invites the reader to focus on the plot and presents Sanger's ideas through dialogue and through the ways they affect narrative development, Jones places emphasis on the visual representation of Sanger's ideas. Just looking for slides to share with you that illustrate what I'm saying. And she uses a dramatic and varying layout, a density of imagery and text, and a layering of the contemporary with the historical, which she has inherited from her time in radical political comics series World War III Illustrated, where a lot of complex information is communicated within a few pages. Yet both use the affordances and appeal of graphic biography at the service of remediating Sanger and countering simplistic or ahistorical narratives and images that are disseminated through mainstream and social media. Looking at Bagge and Jones's books, I focus on two elements central in these contested remembrances: the motivations behind Sanger's activism and the role of eugenics in shaping her ideas. A central role in the two biographies play a number of stories whose accuracy is not as important as the fact that Sanger herself cultivated them as part of a mythology found in her speeches and writings and reproduced extensively over the decades. A mythology that proved that her motivation to dedicate her life to birth control sprang spontaneously from seeing the misery of women who have no control over their reproduction. And I'm not saying mythology because it's not true. I'm saying it because it is a cultivated image that she has created over the course of her life. I'm going to share with you one of these stories, the story of the death of Mrs. Sachs, a working-class mother from complications following a self-induced abortion. We are not sure Mrs. Sachs is an actual person or not a fictional character that Sanger created to easily, in a more dramatic way, explain her revelation of what her life's goal was. So early in her career, Sanger worked as a nurse among New York's poor, mainly migrant population. Sadie Sachs, a young mother of 3 living in a tenement, needed her medical attention after an almost lethal self-induced abortion. After she was restored to health, she asked the doctor and Sanger to help her avoid a future pregnancy. The doctor's dismissive response was, "You want to have your cake and eat it too, do you? Tell Jake to sleep on the roof." When asked to tell Mrs. Sachs, to help Mrs. Sachs, Sanger was unable to do so, either because she was afraid of losing her job or because she herself did not know the secret to controlling reproduction. Jones's version foregrounds Sanger's helplessness in words, as Sanger thinks she won't believe my ignorance, and a caption that contains Sanger's autobiographical voice reads, "I didn't know what to tell her." But most importantly, in drawing her first facial expressions as marked by pity and despair when she is unable to help, and when she avoids visiting Mrs. Sachs because she knows she does not know how to help her, and when she is summoned again to a dying Mrs. Sachs a few months later. Then we follow her train of thought when she leaves a now dead Mrs. Sachs to her desperate husband and children and walks through New York's street or looks out the city from her apartment. In Jones's typical conceptual approach, we find all the long recounted imagery of women in painful labor, cold and hungry children, child labor and mortality that embellished Sanger's speeches. We also find her ensuing determination to stop trying to keep people alive and instead seek out the root of evil and change the destinies of women. Bagge leaves out Mrs. Sachs' death and Sanger's detailed thoughts and places emphasis instead on the conversation between the women when Mrs. Sachs begs Sanger for help, which Sanger cannot give for fear of losing her work if she breaks the law. The emotion foregrounded here is Sanger's helplessness and shock at the door's response, and Mrs. Sachs' disappointment towards the doctor and Sanger herself. The deliberate display of Sanger's concerns about the victims of the system gives way here to 3 short panels that follow Sanger as he takes only a few steps outside Mrs. Sachs' home. Within these panels, Sanger's shame and frustration turn into anger and then rage in what appears to be a couple of seconds. Bagge's use of mainstream comics conventions in his depiction of emotion serves to condense a lot within a small space, but also to turn something complex into something iconic. Sanger's rage towards the doctor and the unjust system that renders her and Mrs. Sachs powerless makes a rhetorical strategy visible on the face of a character who becomes an icon of something more than just the content of Sanger's work, the tone of her writing, especially in her magazine, in her speeches, and her court defenses. While both versions address the issues of gender and class, Jones's version brings in life brings in the life conditions of poor, numerous children, which was an important argument of Sanger's, the one that focused on the benefits of birth control in relation to population control. The reference to children was, moreover, Sanger's strategy of emphasizing despair and a trope to incite compassion and gain support for birth control from those who would find the desire of individual women to control their reproduction as frivolous. Jones makes visual references to downtrodden mother and children, including dead children elsewhere in the book, too. These references echo visual tropes that were common in Sanger's own magazine, Birth Control Review, published between 1917 and 1940, which aimed simultaneously to simultaneously appeal to divergent audiences as it sought to persuade working-class women, while also reinforcing a message to elites about how these women's reproduction should be controlled. Such references are largely absent in Bach, whose version of Mrs. Sachs' story places emphasis on anger, evoking Sanger's strategic use of anger as a rhetorical tool in her early writing, especially The Woman Rebel and Activism. While Sanger's use of anger has been largely dismissed by biographers and scholars, including ones sympathetic to her cause, as a rhetorical blunder, a crude method lacking intellectual depth and moral complexity, it has been reassessed by communicators expert as a shrewd communication strategy when addressing working-class women, appropriate for expressing socialist feminist ideas, and as a rousing rhetoric of high discursive power that helped redefine the legally operative standards of morality in the progressive era. Bach and Jones, therefore, center different strategies that Sanger used to garner support and cement herself as a political agent of legal and political change. Yet they select these from an existing repertoire of memories and tropes that has been established by Sanger herself and has been passed down by different mnemonic agents. In spite of differences in style and the foregrounding of different emotions, the repetition of these well-known stories ensures that Sanger's motivation for fighting for birth control was a spontaneous and pure concern for women's well-being. Concerning Sanger's ideas, Bach and Jones differ in both the ideas they choose to center and the ways in which they present them. Sanger's ideas regarding women's rights, the institution of marriage and free love, ideas that she developed earlier in her activist work in her so-called radical phase, Bach tends to bring up more indirectly, in the form of quick references in the dialogue between characters. Instead, he gives more space to ideas that she developed in the 1920s, which connected her prioritization of women's moral agency with the aims of population control and eugenics. These two are presented as spoken out by Sanger during a public speech and an interview without visual illustration of the ideas. He summarizes the ideas she developed in the book Woman and the New Race. There, Sanger's focus is on women's self-actualization and freedom from the control of their childbearing capacities by religion, government, and industry. The speech lays out the connection between Sanger's understanding of women's moral agency and the moral obligation for population control, drawing a link between women's rights and the betterment of the human race. Bach gives an accurate representation of the main strains in Sanger's thought at that time and diachronically in a framing that affirms Sanger's authority and charisma. Each panel shows Sanger from another angle and distance. This variation in the frame prevents monotony without distracting from the speech that is delivered, which is actually the focus here. In Sanger's speech, the main contradiction in her thinking, namely that when it comes to reproduction, women should have agency, but the impoverished, degraded, and feeble-minded are not in a position to make their own choices. This contradiction is laid out in the open, showing the limitation that resulted from the marriage of birth control and population control, assigning agency largely to middle-class, able women and refusing it to large segments of the population. The following pages qualify this limitation by showing more of the complexity of Sanger's thinking. Outlining her ideas in the pivot of the civilization during an interview, Sanger is being prompted by the journalist to outline her critique of the kind of eugenics she disagrees with, positive eugenics and racist eugenics, and to explain the contradictions in her own thinking, which is also influenced by eugenics. The main points of critique that Sanger had are the that eugenicists ignore human desire and free will, the thinking of sexuality in terms of procreation alone, that they overemphasize the role of nature over environment in the development of poor mental faculties, that distinctions like fit and unfit are bound to reflect conformist ideals of the dominant classes, and that positive eugenics asking people of superior stock to have more children ignore the problem of overpopulation and again reproduced biased ideas of human worth. However, Bach brushes off Sanger's support of forced sterilization in case of mental disability at that time. The quote, "but forced," when she's asked, "maybe in the most extreme circumstances, but even then, that whole idea raises many troubling questions," Sanger says in Bach's on page 55. This quote reflects rather Sanger's later reconsiderations of her 1920s position on the matter after the revelation of Nazi atrocities in the name of eugenics had raised awareness of the consequences of the dehumanization of people with disabilities. Bach, therefore, seems concerned with Sanger's reputation as influenced by her connection with eugenics and appears to want to repair it. Unlike Bach, Jones places Sanger's early radical thought, often overshadowed by the focus on her association with eugenics, at the center of the representation of her ideas. She foregrounds Sanger's emphasis on women's self-determination and sexual emancipation, dedicating 10 pages to her magazine, The Woman Rebel, which only had 8 issues published in the year 1914. Jones presents these ideas largely in the style of the graphic guide too, illustrating them with images next to laying them out in words. The Woman Rebel was directed towards a radical readership, like Emma Goldman's anarchist Mother Earth and Max Eastman's socialist The Masses, reflecting their influence, but also adding on to their politics by giving a voice to radical women as well as practical guidance on how to liberate their passions. It centered working class women's problems and needs, covering sex education and reproductive rights, but also suffrage, workers' rights, and socialist anarchist politics. An image of a naked woman with Sanger's head trapped in the grip of a coiled snake explain Sanger's understanding of the sources of women's oppression and the need for their rebellion. A woman is enslaved by motherhood, childbearing, middle-class morality, wage slavery, customs, laws, and superstitions. The aim of the magazine is thus to liberate working women to think for themselves and claim the right to be lazy, the right to be an unmarried mother, the right to destroy, the right to create, the right to love, the right to live. All these ideas, Jones presents in a deliberately naive style of illustration, doubling the textual information which echoes the didactic political comics of her earlier work. Sanger's eugenics influence and legacy is taken up by Jones too in a section titled False Charges. In it, Jones addresses the accusations of racism directed at Sanger. There we read about Sanger's equal treatment of African American people in her clinic in Harlem, which is shown to open after an invitation by social workers from Harlem concerned with high maternal and infant mortality, and Sanger's work on bringing contraception to African Americans in the segregated South. The section, moreover, stresses the differences between Sanger's eugenicist ideas and racist eugenics, having Sanger herself speak them out. "I reject cradle competition. Good traits occur in all kinds of people. Family size and other social conditions create inequality." It presents a compelling overview of the context within which Sanger's collaboration with and influence by eugenicists took place, explaining it, like Sanger's supporters do among her biographers and historians and mnemonic stakeholders, as stemming from her strategic decision to gain political and social backing by affiliating her cause to one more acceptable and well-supported at the time than hers was. Jones also locates the contemporary mnemonic practices that stress her involvement with eugenics within a context made complex by medical discrimination against people of color and subsequent distrust to the medical establishment, as well as the willful demonization of Sanger by opponents of abortion. To conclude, Both Bach and Jones address Sanger's involvement with eugenics and show that she supported population control, but not on racist motivations. Both emphasize that she prioritized women's freedom to population control rather than subordinated to it, which distinguishes her from other supporters of eugenics. Bach, however, shows Sanger's feminist thought as deeply influenced by eugenics by centering the ideas she developed in the 1920s, when her support for women's freedom was already quite entangled with her support for population control. Jones, on the other hand, places more emphasis on Sanger's early thought, developed during her radical phase, which can be explained by Jones' own feminist activism in reproductive rights campaigns in the 1980s. Bach's narrative-driven style and Jones' conceptual illustration originating in political posters and comics are almost two different genres of visual communication. Their ability to create a complex remembrance of Sanger relies on different affordances, but they both manage to create remediation of Sanger's work and thought that can counter the simplistic images and narratives that circulate about Sanger in other media. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vasiliki. I particularly liked the discussion of the ways in which the different comics kind of mirrored Sanger's magazine. And I'm sure that everyone has lots of questions, but they can't ask them right now because we've got another speaker. So just sit on your questions for now, save them up. And next, we'll have Silas Denze, who is an interdisciplinary researcher of humanities and communication at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya in Barcelona, Spain. His research interests cut across social movements, digital activism and memory, digital ethnography, African studies, and qualitative methods. So coming at memory of activism from a very different perspective. He has published in top peer-reviewed journals such as Media, War and Conflict, Memory Studies and Communication in the Public. And he is a research fellow at the Centre of Digital Anthropology at University College London and a member of the Digital Ethnography Working Group at Rutgers University in the United States. And today, Silas will be presenting on the intersectionality of implicit collective memory and activism in Nigeria's End SARS movement. So thank you very much. And the floor is now yours. You're right there, Silas.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, my computer's kind of slow. Thank you for the introduction. Of course, my name is Silas, and I'm going to be presenting a work, as you can see from the screen. It's about a movement. Can you see my next screen? Okay, just wanted to be sure. Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a background about my work. It's called the End SARS movement, which is an acronym for Special Anti-Robbery Squad, police unit in Nigeria, which was actually formed in 1992 to curb violent crime. And of course, the police unit currently has indulged in different acts of human rights violation and intimidation. The End SARS movement in Nigeria actually started on Twitter in 2017. And on October 3rd, 2020, the police allegedly shot a young boy, 22 years old Joshua Ambrose in South Nigeria, and that triggered people to go on the street to protest. And throughout October, we were on the street because I identify as an activist scholar. was part of the NSAS from 2017 to went on the street in Abuja, Nigeria, the capital of our country. Then in October 2020, at the popular Lekki toll gate, from the image there, you can see the toll gate there where we have a lot of people gathered protesting. The government allegedly mobilized the military to shoot at these peaceful protesters at the Lekki toll gate. And some young people were killed. And this 20th of October became to be known as the NSAS commemoration or NSAS memorial. And like I said earlier on, from the image, you can see people at the Lekki toll gate from the screenshots I got from my research. And this Lekki toll gate I describe as a site of memory even to today, in as much as it's a toll gate where vehicles pass and the government collects money, tolls from this vehicle. Now, my journey into this research, I describe as a repertoire of memory, in the sense that I am a part of this research, and having started this agitation in 2017 from October, where we were in the street. And my work, of course, is part of my PhD grounded in digital ethnography, because I was part of this movement in Nigeria, where I was living before traveling to Spain, where I started my PhD in 2021. So I even followed this movement online, and I particularly did that on WhatsApp and Instagram. In this process, I collected about 105 screenshots from Instagram and WhatsApp during my interaction with my participants on the platform, and the process, I conducted interviews with 21 participants. Mind you, most of these people were people I met on the street of Abuja during the protests in 2020, and our interactions centered around their experience, both online and offline, about the movement. Now, during my travel to Nigeria, it was very, very interesting because I got to talk with my participants one-on-one, face-to-face, people I had been on the street with. And of course, I deciphered the challenge in studying this kind of phenomena, especially in a country where there's issue about repressiveness of human freedom on such discussion. And the issue of fear actually came up more and more. But I would say that my experience about the movement, about the NSAS protest, was very, very important in making me build friendship with these people, for them to talk, because most time you tend to meet people to discuss with them about the topic, and there is this constant scrutiny of me. Oh, where are you? Are you at the bus stop? Are you the one wearing that cloth? I say, yes, I am. And when we started the discussion, you asked certain questions about the movement, and the person tries to see you as somebody that is trying to probe them to get information you could say to the government. But when I talk and bring instances about the movement and the important aspect that happened in my presence in Abuja, on ground in the movement, they tend to relax. Say, oh, I think this guy knows so much about the movement. And that actually created a lot of conducive atmosphere for my interlocutors to speak. And of course, Nigeria is a very diverse society with more than 500 languages. Yeah, and the three major languages in Nigeria is actually Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Hausa is predominantly spoken in the north, and Igbo and Yoruba is spoken in the southern part of Nigeria. I am Igbo, and of course, we speak the Pidgin English in Nigeria, the English Creole, like a mix of standard English language and Portuguese. So it's actually part of, I use this indigenous language in my research a lot, especially the Creole English, the Nigeria Pidgin English. So this embodiment, this embodied process in this research actually created a lot of conducive atmosphere, and it built trust with my interlocutors, in as much as I've known most of them before. Yeah, you can see from the screenshot, you can see there is the popular Lekki toll gate where people were allegedly shot, like I said earlier on, and you could see a word there. It's a Yoruba word. This is actually Sorosoke in Yoruba. It means speak up. It means speak up. So you could see Sorosoke against police brutality. Now, that is Yoruba language. Like I said earlier on, I speak Hausa, I speak Igbo, and I speak Yoruba. The former image you could see here was actually me in Lagos, the southwest Nigeria, Lagos in Nigeria, where I was on the field. You could see how rough I was looking. Spent about 2 weeks in Lagos chasing my interlocutors just to get information about the experience of the NSAS from them. Now, in all this, part of this angle of my thesis, what actually happened? Like I described my experience as a rapporteur of memory and the data itself, when discussing with my participants, especially during the interview and following the data online, we don't actually talk about memory. When I ask questions, I don't ask questions about memory. And I ask questions about the experience of the NSAS. But surprisingly, my interlocutors and the data from the online conversation on WhatsApp and Instagram tend to point to 3 main challenges in the country. Unconsciously, as I would put, these interlocutors try to talk about some of the prevailing socioeconomic challenges that has been bedeviling young people in the country. One of them is unemployment, youth unemployment. Secondly is poverty. And third is endemic public sector corruption or government corruption. This argument, these findings or this spontaneity in trying to bring out this unconscious feeling, I would call implicit memory, collective memory, because we're not just talking about what happened on the Lekki toll gate or what they are posting, but there's this constant recollection, impromptu, of their experience on this of the NSAS movement tied to this shared socioeconomic trauma, like I will discuss. That I argued in a paper, Media One Conflict, about the intersectionality of these three challenges, where we published with my thesis director, Anthony Roge and Fernanda Perez in Media One Conflict. Now, like one of my interlocutors will put, we have a whole lot of unemployment issues. We have police brutality issues. We don't have enough voltage power. We don't have enough source of income, no employment opportunity. This is actually from Dan Drum. That's not his real name. 25 years male, unemployed. It's like Dan Drum participated in the movement, but Dan Drum isn't talking about police brutality. Dan Drum is even talking about a lot of socioeconomic issue, which indirectly says lead to police brutality. For instance, the issue of endemic public sector corruption in Nigeria, according to some of my interlocutors, are actually led to the underfunding of the police. So it is not necessarily about the police brutalizing them. It's like an intrinsic nature of the government underfunding the police, thereby brutalizing the police, I would say, making them to stand on the road to extort young people. Now, the image you can see, there's one of the prominent image shared by some of my interlocutors. You can see it's like I would call that a sort of a meme, a person with their eye locked, ear locked, and mouth locked. It's like saying that they deny you jobs, and because you're self-employed, then they deny you water. It's like trying to tell Nigerians that every effort by people to actually earn a living, to actually make life worthwhile for them, is being suppressed by the government. Now, we can see also that this argument about the implicitness of my my research, what I describe as implicit collective memory, I also try to make an argument because in investigating the Instagram feeds or posting of my interlocutors and the WhatsApp group and WhatsApp stories I also followed, my interlocutors engage in sort of implicit activist practices. Sort of when you ask them in the interview, are you an activist? They say, no, I'm not an activist. But their posting depicts some sort of implicit activism, but which you ask them, are you an activist? They say, no, I am not an activist. That brings us to the next slide, which I describe as self-woke representation. Like these people don't identify as activists when you ask them, but their whole narration on Instagram and equally WhatsApp tend to portray some people that are woke in the sense of people that are aware of some social political challenge in Nigeria, and they tend to create this political biography of themselves that are dissimilar from when I ask them, are you an activist? They say, no, I'm not an activist. That I try to explain in a forthcoming paper in Memory Studies, my argument about implicit collective activism and implicit collective memory and implicit activism in Memory Study. Hopefully the paper will be published very soon. Now, that also I describe as not entirely performative activism, like we know performance in some instances, like some scholars have argued. Performance could be some sort of slacktivism that does not actually engender some impact, so to put, but in the case of my work, most of these respondents are actually people that portray themselves and their activist practices on these two social media platforms as something that is not entirely performative in the sense of it does not yield any impact, but yield some desirable impact. Like a 31-year-old male identified as a social media influencer put, the post on my Instagram are to let people know the cause we're fighting for, and for the government to also know that the youth of Nigeria are wiser. This narrative actually also displayed the wokeness of these interlocutors. And you can see from a screenshot from oh, Jesus Christ.
Katarzyna, do you know what's going on?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we lost Silius for a second. I think he left the meeting by accident. So let's hope he will rejoin in a second.
All right, let's give it 5 minutes.
I sent Silas the link again to join the meeting, but yeah, I think he's now just joining. I just need to. Hmm.
Hooray!
Sorry, the power in the other room went off.
That's all right. You were just about to get to Burner Boy.
Yeah. Oh my God, what's happening?
Luckily, we have lots of time, so take your time.
I'll have to leave now and rejoin again. I think some technical issue.
Katarzyna, do you have the PowerPoint? Because maybe there's a way you could share it from your screen.
Yeah, I wanted to just to.
Yeah,
propose
he left too fast.
Yeah, that's.
All right, if he comes back, we'll.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Oh my God. So that's my participant described as not entirely performative activism, and you could see one of the screenshots from my data, Burna Boy's 2010-20. It actually talked about the shooting of the young people on October 20, 2020, and you could see the lyrics from there in Nigerian Pidgin English, which says the money where you thief yakpa for your azar. You don't turn our graduates to common beggars. All the book them go no matter, cause get job if they know no Godfather. This is a Nigerian cruel who actually say that the politicians has a lot of money in their account and all the education is of no importance, that you don't have a job if you don't have a Godfather. So you can see still on the socioeconomic situation. Now, this intersectionality of this of issue of poverty, unemployment, and corruption, which I described leads to police brutality, actually points us to the colonial legacy of police brutality in Nigeria, because it's a continuum, like I would describe. And this is synonymous to Didier Farson argument. Didier Farson, who did a very interesting work about about the Parisian police in Paris, which described the police as they are there to enforce order rather than maintaining peace. And this is whose order are they enforcing? In my argument, is the state order, those in authority, as in the case of Nigeria. Now, one of my participants, 18 years ago, and she's a petty trader, as she says that the police in this country will never change. They have been harassing people for a long time. You are driving through the roads and the police officer is stopping to demand a bribe. Even when you report a case in the police station as a patriot, as a patriotic citizen, the police can turn the case against you. Well, this has been my experience even in Nigeria. So it's a perennial issue which interlinks with this unconsciousness, spontaneity in my respondent, which they bring out about the intersection of these socioeconomic challenges. Now, at the end, what do we say? Now, all this narrative, I would argue that it points us to something which is more of a retrospective memory, where we're coming from as Nigerians, the socioeconomic challenges that these people have been going through, and are pointing us to prospective memory, what still needs to be done. We need to have a very good country and some sort of anticipatory memory for a better country in Nigeria, where we're going and what still needs to be done. So that is my argument, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation, notwithstanding the technicalities that happened. And you can see an image I got from one of my respondents say, "Kill corruption, not Nigerians." It's like still pointing us to telling the police or telling the government, don't kill our dreams, but kill corruption, because that is the bane of underdevelopment and some sort of stagnation in the country. So thank you very much, and I'm open to conversation and questions about my work. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for what happened earlier on. It's just beyond me.
Thank you, Selas. And thank you also for persevering despite technical difficulties. And so again, we'll save questions for the end after our final speaker of today. And so round up everything at that point. But I think this is very interesting, the ways in which memory operated, both looking forwards and backwards in this case. So our final speaker of today is Paula Tortosa. And Paula is a psychologist from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. Paula is a specialist in gender studies and policies from the National University of Tres de Febrero. She has a master's in epidemiology, health management and policies from the National University of Lanús, and is a doctoral candidate in social sciences. Paula is a CONICET doctoral scholarship fellow with the research topic Performative Inventions in State Terrorism in Argentina. And Paula today will be talking about embodying memories of missing people in Argentina during the last military dictatorship. So again, 20 minutes from you, and then we'll also have questions from all of the speakers at the end. Thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see what I'm presenting right now? Yeah, I'm going to go full screen. Well, thank you very much. I'm really honored and happy to be here. I'm very excited about it. And I'm going to share with you it's a work in progress. And so I'm very open to comments, debates, questions, and everything that will show up later. Sorry, here. So the idea, this is a brief map of the presentation today that I want to share with you. I want to start with situating where I stand, where I'm speaking from. I'm going to make a very, very short reference, so it makes sense afterwards, about the Argentinian social political context. I'm going to make a reference also about the construction of memories of the recent past in Argentina. And I'm going to focus on some artistic interventions, artivist interventions, and then share some final thoughts. So speaking out this concept of situated knowledges that Donna Haraway lends us here, I'm speaking from Argentina. In case you're not familiar where it is, it's there. We're at the end of the American continent, down there. And I'm going to be speaking particularly from the city of Buenos Aires, which is the capital, which is also very different from other parts of the country. So I think that it's important to take into account. As Donna Haraway says, this situated knowledges not only has to do with the location where they are built, where they are imparted, but also have to do with, I'm here quoting the Brazilian author, Dalmila Ribeiro, with the lugar de fala, with the place of speech, or as it was translated, where we stand. I stand, as Clara was saying in the presentation, I'm a researcher, I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm also a human rights activist. My research comes from my activism, and I'm also a performer within this human rights organization that I participate. My methodological approach takes elements then from participatory action research and also autoethnography as a way of building knowledge with the body and from the bodies. And I occupy sometimes a double or sometimes a triple role as a researcher, activist, and performer. Well, I thought that was very important to say. So my theoretical approach is within the memory studies field as a vast interdisciplinary field. And there I also take many concepts, and I work with different concepts from the cultural studies, performance studies, and as it was noted before, I'm a psychologist and I work within the community social psychology framework from a decolonial and transfeminist perspective. Well, after this brief presentation of where I stand here, I'm going to make reference to this the particular context. The second half of the 20th century was known as a context of political unrest in many parts of Latin America, and in South America, in the Southern Cone, particularly suffered many military dictatorships and different forms of state violence too. This involves multiple violations of human rights. In Argentina, we had many dictatorships, as you can see there. I'm going to focus on the last one, but I'm also going to make a note there that it's very important that although the dictatorship started in 1976 and lasted until 1983, state terrorism, or what is known, we know here as state terrorism, state violence, started in 1974, which was known as the AAA Anti-Communist Argentinian Alliance, and then got intensified in 1976 with the most atrocious last, what we call civil, ecclesiastic, and military dictatorship that we had here. We describe this period as state terrorism, as state violence, and these actions that were carried out by the military regime include different forms of state violence, such as annihilation of all democratic rights, persecution of people who didn't think alike, censorship, kidnapping, imprisonment in clandestine detention center, torture, kidnapping of children and babies whose identity has been stolen. Many people were forced to exile, to leave the country. Many others lived in fear. And among all these atrocities, what I'm going to focus on today is one that has been the most emblematic figure of the Argentinian case, the systematic plan of massive disappearing of people. These are known in Argentina as les desaparecides, los desaparecidos, las desaparecidas. It's people that were mainly kidnapped by the military regime, and we don't know what happened to them. We know that well, afterwards we knew that after many investigations that have given an account that many were murdered, tortured, thrown into the river from planes alive. And for many others, there are no traces of what happened to them, and most of their bodies haven't been found yet, unfortunately. So after this, and many have been the struggles for memory, truth, and justice in our country. Also, we need to point out this is not a thorough account of everything that happened, but just some pointers of what happened and what's going on right now. We have to name the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, the mothers that were looking for their, at the moment, missing children. They wanted, here they are holding a sign that says that they appear alive. And this protest started within the dictatorship, within the context of the dictatorships, and this was very brave of them. Many of them also went missing, and they risked their lives doing this, and also many human rights organizations. In the 80s, we had the first trials for justice. In the 90s, we had pardon and impunity laws. In 2004, the trials were resumed against the perpetrators, and different politics of memory reparation of victims were carried out. Nowadays, 2020 trials are still taking place. That's why this thing is not something from the past. It's something that is still going on. We're still looking for missing people. We're still looking for children who's now they're adults of around 40, 50-year-old, whose identity has been taken from them. We're still looking for them, and we're still looking for justice, and particularly, and very unfortunately, this new government that we have reivindicates the crimes perpetrated by the military regime, and well, it's a very challenging moment right now in Argentina, honestly. So, sorry, there. So, who were les desaparecidas, the disappeared? They were, to begin with, well, there's a debate about the number, but it's an estimation that there were 30,000 people. This is also a symbolic number that carries a very big connotation. There have been a lot of debate to discredit human rights organizations about this number. The thing is, we cannot know for sure how many they were because the military made a pact of silence, so we don't know exactly how many they were. And it involves different background and ages. Mainly anyone who opposed the dictatorship or felt as a potential threat, and many of them were activists in different areas, political activists in political parties, political groups, students' unions, factory unions, workers, intellectuals, people that carried out a very strong political activism, among others. So how do we build memories of the disappeared in Argentina? So there are different ways. We have memory sites, monuments, museums, cultural products. There's a lot of books, movies, play, performances, musical, visual arts. There are memorial paved stones. I'm going to reference that in a little bit. And there are public commemorations. One thing that they do have into account is that they use aesthetic devices in building memories of the disappeared. I'm very sorry about this blurry picture, but it was a protest that took place during the dictatorship, during the end in 82. The dictatorship finished in 83. And this is a protest in one of our main plazas in the city of Buenos Aires. And they're making silhouettes of the missing people. This has a very strong also narrative effect about showing a silhouette of a person that here they are not in the ground, they are not dead, they were standing up because they are missing. We don't know what happened to them. Another very, very important part of this building of memory of the disappeared people is our ritual, which is the 24th of March, which commemorates the start of the last military dictatorship. And there's many events all over the country. As I say, I focus on the city of Buenos Aires, where there's a massive march that takes place every year in the center, in the political center of the city and the political center of the country. Here, I also included in black and white, you can see a picture of a demonstration led by the mothers, but the Madres of Plaza de Mayo at an ex-clandestine center during the dictatorship. These are different images, different picture photographs of missing people. This is outside that ex-clandestine center called ESMA. And this is an intervention that was done with friends and family of disappeared people, building their faces together and sticking them outside the walls of this place. And the one I want to focus on today is within the activities that occurred outside this massive march that occur. They are way smaller, right? And they occur in different neighborhoods of the city of Buenos Aires. And here I want to talk about Compañía de Funciones Patrióticas, which means Company of Patriotic Performances would be the translation. This group was formed in 2008, and it's a group, they define themselves as a group of theater, performance, and artivism. And within many of their actions, they, since 2017, they carried out one on the 24th of March, on this very special day that is called Los Barrios Tienen Memoria, which means in Spanish, neighborhoods have memory. On these days, well, they carry out every year on that date, or sometimes the day before, because people do go to the march also, so it's important to have both actions as a part of their activism. And they do actions in what you can see in the picture. It's called memorial paving stones, or memory tiles also. They're paving stones that we put on the ground that commemorate the victims of state terrorism in Argentina, particularly the missing people, the disappeared people, right? Los desaparecidos. Here in this one, you can see this one was put in a plaza just opposite where this person lived and worked. And it says militante popular. It means popular activist, militante popular. This was an agreement done. There are different groups in different parts of the city that are a part, as you can see on the tile in the bottom, barrios por memoria y justicia, neighborhoods for memory and justice. They're just activist groups of neighbors. I'm a part of one of them that do. We make these tiles from scratch. We mix the cement. We talk to their, usually it's a family member or a friend or a colleague, or sometimes here in this case, it's where outside a school where people study. These are missing students, and also people missing teachers of that school. And these memorial paving stones are placed there in everyday places, places where they live, work, study, where they have political activities, and in some cases, places where people were murdered and or kidnapped. And here you see this figure also with a stencil of the 30,000, which is a very symbolic and important number representing the disappeared people. So these popular militants, it was an agreement to put these militantes populares as people were activists from different political groups, from different unions, as I was saying, from students' unions, working unions, and different political groups. So this group, Compañía de Funciones Patrióticas, that I was referring to, they do interventions in these memory tiles in different neighborhoods. This is in a neighborhood that it's my neighborhood in particular. And they do what they call a site-specific intervention, which is very particular since they do situated narratives that take place, that shape as a site-specific work, and involves a research process using a methodology that is particularly to that territory where they develop, and they many times they propose what it's like a walking drift or a walking tour where you follow someone and there's an intervention on the street in this tile. This is on the sidewalk, right, with people just walking by, and then you move into a different one where there's another performance, like a kind of a walking tour through different locations where these tiles, these memorial paving stones are set. They mostly take place in the streets, and they use elements and occurrences from the public space and they invite to the construction of situated memories and meaning in a shared place and time. Here they use, it's very interesting, they use performatic elements with the first person, they speak in the first person that refer to the past and also to the present implication of the person doing the performance or the people doing the performance. Sometimes it's more than one. They also challenge the traditional role of spectator or audience, and they challenge them to become also participants. There's a dialogue, and they involve this audience, sometimes even in different roles as co-creators of the performance that is taking place. This relato situado, which could be translated as situated story, includes elements, as we were saying, of the location where the performance is taking place, and it also takes, it gets unexpected audience. Sometimes there's people that go there that we know what's going to happen, but sometimes there are people just walking by, then see what's going on, stop or not at the performance. And it mixes elements of reality and fictions and creates a narrative around that memorial paving stone. And well, as you can see in this one, this is another one in another neighborhood of the city, which I participated also as a performer. That's not me in the picture, it's someone else. And we also, it's used different digital elements, like here, you're gonna see in this next picture also, QR codes that brought you to different audios and also different images. So this public's intervention on what it seems random locations, because they are not memory sites, embody ways of remembering and building memories about the disappeared people, not only as victims, but also as neighbors, students, activists, and workers. And it spans new ways of representation of the recent past. This group also does or has done different interventions in what I call dense territories. This is one of the most horrible clandestine centers, the most emblematic in Argentina. It was the Navy Mechanic School. There, well, a lot of babies were born in captivity. They torture people, they kill people, they organize the death flights. Well, different horrible things happen in that location. Now it's a memory site and a museum. And they did an intervention all around the, not inside the place, but all around it, in the neighborhood surrounding, trying to, these pictures are not as nice because I took them during that tour. The other ones are more professional, as you will notice. And the idea was to question the territory around it, what was going on back then, if neighbors knew what was going on, and what happens to them now. Sorry. So these narratives of the recent past through artistic activism or artivism, they are collective creations in public spaces, and they use different artistic languages, performance, theater, music, dance, and also the use of digital platforms. Sorry, there. Also, they question the mainstream narrative about the disappeared as only victims. Of course, they were victims, but they were much more. And also, through a gender perspective, their position as men, as active, defiant, and heroic, in contrast with the disappeared women who were seen the mainstream representation as defenseless victims. This dynamic explicitly reveals the influence of the patriarchal system in reinforcing gender essentialization rooted into stereotypes. In this sense, the work of Funciones Patrióticas, I believe, connects us to other narratives that goes beyond the heroicity of men or the victimhood of women. Instead, making visible them as activists, as fighters, as students, as professionals, and friends and family members. These public interventions temporarily activate the materiality of the memory where they are taking place, including the territories of the memorial paving stones, bringing the remembrance of the missing people into the present. Final thoughts, I believe that these interventions contribute in activating the archives. They are a way of incarnated memories. They singularize the narratives, speaking specifically about the story of the person in that paving stone, in that memory tile, and also connects with other memories of that territory, of that neighborhood. It has happened through many interventions that a neighbor stops by and had never seen, for instance, that tile, or knew that person, or knew something about that person. So other memories are being built, and their social ties are resignified, and collective memory rituals are also, they take place in this commemoration date around the 24th of March, but outside the mainstream march and the memory sites. Also shows narratives of memories of resistance, and it's another way of connecting to the past, the present, and also imagining other foreseeable futures. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to try to stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you, Paula. And yeah, it's interesting the ways in which these artistic works kind of reinscribe the ways in which these were figures of resistance or activists themselves, feeding into the kind of the wider theme of the memory of activism. So given the time, I think we can now open out to the Q&A. So hopefully you will now all be able to turn your cameras on. And I really invite you to do this so that we can feel a bit more like we're all in the shared space. And that way you can also either raise your hand on the screen or raise your hand using the icon, or you can feel free to put questions in the chat. I have a lot of questions myself, but I'll start by opening the floor to others. Yes, Vesa.
Yes, thank you both for these wonderful presentations. So interesting to hear about these movements and the way they are remembered. I have two questions, but they are both about the use of art. So I was curious if Silas can tell me if there are any artistic interventions that create these imaginative ways that bridge the retrospective memory with the prospective, anticipatory memory within NSARS. And then for Paula, I was wondering how the artistic practices, because you have mentioned many different artistic practices, how they have developed over the decades, if they have developed over the decades. So did they start from the beginning? Did they start at some point later? Were some cultural forms more common at specific times than other forms? Is there a connection between the prevalent art forms and more specific objectives or priorities of the movement at the time?
Thank you. These are great questions. Silas, do you want to answer first?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vasiliki. Of course, in terms of the NSARS, of course, there are a lot of artistic expression. Of course, in Nigeria, of course, am I clear? Okay, yeah. In Nigeria, of course, especially when it comes to music, Afrobeat, of course, there's a lot of that, and we got artists, renowned artists like Burna Boy, which did a soundtrack on 2010, 2020, and also Davido, and a very renowned artist in Nigeria also. But most importantly, there is this commercialization of some of this artistic work during the NSARS, during the peak of the NSARS, because of course, Nigeria, we have this commercial center in the southeastern part of Nigeria, Aba, where they make clothes. And during the peak of the NSARS, there was this constant making of T-shirts that embodies 2010, 2020. And another one came out, if I could remember clearly, that has this inscription: corruption don't do. It's a pidgin English, like corruption, it is okay. So there was a lot of them. And recently also, if I remember clearly, there's this Nigerian, she did an exhibition in Vienna. I've forgotten her name, and artistic exhibition that came out of the ENSA. So there was a lot of them, and the anticipatory part of this art, like we see, like in my study, which I express in another paper, some of them some of them ask questions. Like we have this question that were asking during the peak, when Nigeria? It's like, when Nigeria? Then it's like, when will things get better? So in as much as we embody this retrospectiveness of where we're coming from, but this big question that was so artistic in the clothes, like when Nigeria, it's like asking, when will all these challenges stop? So there were a lot of them, especially when it comes from the entertainment angle and from the commercialization of these terms and slogans, and people bought these clothes in very large quantities to also project their stand during the peak of the protest. And mind you, EndSARS is a continuum. It's a movement in itself, because 20th October every year is the anniversary of the EndSARS. But most times, I think the anniversary has dwindled a bit. But I would say any 20th of October, there seems to be a resuscitation of this artistic work in different kind of clothings that are being made in Aba. Aba is like a commercial center where they make a lot of items. So it actually come in place, but through the commercialization of this artistic expression.
Thank you very much.
Paola, would you like to answer your question?
Yes, well, thank you very much for both of the presentations, super interesting, and thank you very much for the questions. They are very long to reply, but yes, there's a lot that has been studied on this field. It's very vast. Art or different aesthetic forms have been a part of the human rights movement since the beginning of the start of the fights of the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. They have been really connected with different purposes. At the beginning, first was to ask, where are their children, bring them back, and where are the other children, babies born in captivity, born in clandestine centers. They knew they were pregnant women that were taken. So where are those babies? Had a visibility and a complaint objective. Then it was all through visual, and especially in different demonstrations, right? Like these silhouettes, also hands was another one. Well, different ones. There's a lot written about it. It's a very vast thing. After democracy, some movies started happening, some fiction movies, and some theater plays also before too, like they had started within the end of the dictatorship, before it was very dangerous. A lot of music, and they respond to different objectives. As I was saying, there were different periods in the struggles of memory. And in the 90s, it was the struggle for justice, because they gave amnesty to all the perpetrators. So it was asking for justice, because there were very interesting, there are many documentaries about it, about interventions done by an organization called HIJOS, which is the Children of Missing People, with other artistic like interventions, performatives that were scratches, like they went to the places, for instance, where these perpetrators were living in different neighborhoods of the country, and they would do an intervention on the street there with different forms of art. And well, it has been changing into, I'm studying particularly, what I'm seeing is that in 2016, there was a huge shift, and it was the 40th anniversary of the start of the military coup, and there were a lot of performatic interventions in the streets. happening, asking for justice. This also had to do with the change of government. And also nowadays we're seeing that it's coming back with a lot of force with movies. There's 1985. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's a movie about one of the trials, the main trial. And right now the objective is a resistance of memory. Memory is at risk right now in Argentina. So it's very important to continue doing these activities and to also try to reach more people about this. Just, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now that you're a bit warmed up in answering questions, I'm going to collect a couple and then give you some time to answer them. So I have, is it Athena? Who has their hand up? Athena? Dr. Athena is the name I've got here. But we can't hear you. If you're having trouble with your sound, feel free to write it into the chat, and we can go from there. While you're doing that, I'll go to Silas, who has a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Super interesting presentation by Sadiki and Paula. And I have a question for Paula. Yeah, because I was privileged to see the 1985 movie, Argentina 1985, the 2022 release of Argentina 1985. A super interesting movie, and I got to know a lot about the disappearance of young people in Argentina and the steadfastness of a character that refused to compromise in the movie during the trial. So my question regarding this artisticness in the neighborhood and in the paving stones in the streets is regarding in the barrios, in the districts. Are there instances of repressiveness from the district, from the government, so to speak, that try to stop this performatic actions of trying to put the environment in a state that portrays the disappearance of these people?
Oh, he's frozen. Alina, if you want to jump in with your question, and then we can let Silas go finish his when he's ready.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank all the presenters for their presentations. I think there's a lot to work with in the discussion. I wanted to say, Paula, that I really appreciated in the beginning of your presentation the situation of yourself and also the discussion of situated knowledges, which really made me also remind of recent discussions within memory studies about the responsibility of memory scholars when they're studying activism. So I think it was a very elegant way of going about that. I have two small questions, and they're actually both for Silas, who hopefully will once again join our meeting because I see that he fell out of the meeting again. Okay, but I will pose my questions anyway. The first is that he was, I cannot ask them.
Yeah, do you want to hold on to them and ask them when he comes back?
Okay.
Meeting slightly plagued by technical difficulties. Just to add a final question onto I hope you two who are in the meeting right now, keeping track of everything, just to throw in another question. I was wondering about Vasiliki, your presentation. I'd like you to hear a bit more about the particular affordances of comics as a medium in this case. And what you think that kind of combination of visual and verbal is adding to other kinds of mediations of Margaret Sanger's memory, what it's maybe able to do differently, and just how that medium is working in this case a little bit more. So I hope you two have those questions ready, and we'll collect more in a little bit. Oh, one more. Jamie Lucas.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And I just have to say, fantastic job all around. And also to Silas, although I know he's dropped off for the moment. I just really a question for you, Paula. I was so moved by your work. I'm researching intersectionality in the US military and African Americans and queerness. I'm wondering, are you working at all on any guidebook or any key recommendations? Because I think that the way you position artivism is remarkable. And quite frankly, I'm now in second year of my PhD, and you just give me an idea to flip one of my chapters around. So I just have to say, fantastic job. Absolutely stunning work there. Absolutely wonderful.
Do you want to respond to the questions we have so far, Paula and Vasiliki, and then we'll go back to more. I can see there's Pablo with another, so we'll come back in a second.
I could say a lot about comics and how they help create more nuanced or layered representations, a bit more in general. But with these two works, this is still something I'm working on. But I can say a little bit more still that well, they're very different kinds of. They have different kinds of drawing styles. They create very different atmospheres. And they make different kinds of visual references. In Page's work, fashion plays a big role, and the cartoonish version of the characters he creates a very vivid experience of being there in his representation, but also he creates a certain kind of ironic distance in his cartoonish style. Whereas with and in the way that he presents the characters, even when they are discussing very serious topics, when he places Sanger in front of an audience, making a speech, still there seems to be a certain kind of sarcasm about her. And this, of course, sometimes you can also see in the text a certain kind of presenting her as a failing human character and a ridiculous character at times. And this creates a very layered representation of Sanger, that even though he largely supports her politics and sees it in a positive light, he does acknowledge that she's flawed in a way that has very much to do with the visual aspect of the book. And in the case of Jones, I have already spoken a little bit about this. It really is she does a lot of things. So she creates a very strong connection between past and present in her images, because they may have images from her magazine or from or conceptualizations of conceptual illustrations of her ideas at a specific time, and then connect them with the words to today and the debates that are happening today. So she does something very different than back, but still allows for complexity, looking maybe more critical kind of point of view, or looking at it from a meta level when she presents the ideas with the text. So these kinds of things can happen a lot in comic books, as I've seen also in other works, but specifically with these are the more important affordances.
Thank you. Paula, would you like to respond to your questions?
Well, thank you very much for the comments, both Elaine and Jamie Lucas. Thank you. And Silas too. I don't know if I got the whole idea right, but I think you were asking if what was the relationship, if there were some tension with the government, especially with these interventions and with this settling these memorial paving stones. Not particularly, at least not so far. This is with the city of Buenos Aires. Also, it's a very particular place, I repeat, compared to the rest of the country. I don't like this word, but it's considered maybe more progressive, not the country, but maybe the city itself sees themselves that way. I'm not sure if I agree completely, but well, let's say that. And we hadn't had any attacks from the government, but we have had many complications. The city here loves redoing sidewalks constantly, and then they left our memory tiles, and then we cannot find them. Sometimes someone is like, we're grateful enough that someone keeps them and let us know, and sometimes we have to do it again and put it again. And we had over the past year, very unfortunately, we hadn't had this so seriously before, many attacks on the memory tiles by the members of the political party who is now in power, of the political power. I'm speaking of the national, not the city. And yeah, like, it creates also a situation of fear for when we're doing this intervention, these activities. And we have to be extra cautious when we're doing all these activities. It's really a very hostile situation right now that we are living in Argentina. I cannot stress that enough. Not only as activists, but also as researchers. It's very hard for us to be, it's very hard for me to be here. It's very hard for us. It's the first time I participate in this kind of events, which I feel I'm very privileged and lucky, but it's very, very hard for us. Everything is unfunded. We have zero resources. Our salaries are the worst in Latin America. So we're taking as many jobs as we can. And in the meanwhile, we're doing some research on a side, trying to finish our PhD and trying to also activate in different areas. So it's very, very hard. Sorry, I'm stressing that, but it's the reality going on here. And especially right now for people who study these topics, memory studies and about the last military dictatorship, especially also things that are connected with gender studies. It's really, really complicated, and it's becoming a bit threatening too in some ways. And no, I'm not working on any guidebook or anything. I would love to, but well, this is what I think I can share in general of what they asked me, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Aline, would you like to ask your questions now that Silas is back?
I will keep it short to give Pablo also the opportunity to ask his questions and other people too. What I had two small questions for Silas. Silas, I scrolled to be able to look at you while I post them. So the first was that you were talking in your presentation about implicit memory, and I was wondering how you conceptualized implicit memory, why you used that term, and how it distinguishes from, for example, explicit memory. And then the second question was that during your presentation, you emphasized a lot the shared socioeconomic trauma by the participants in your research. And that made me think of a discussion that we had earlier in our working group on the dilemma of how memory can help in resolving material inequalities. And so I was wondering, the participants in your research, how they articulate the link between mnemonic change on the one hand and then socioeconomic change on the other. So how is memory important in their struggle for socioeconomic justice? You're still muted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for that very important question. Like I emphasized during my presentation, my research is about NSAS movement. And actually, when I embark on this research, trying to gather my digital ethnographic data and the interviews I carried out with my participant, one thing was very clear. The participant and most of their posting were not necessarily about police brutality. During our conversation, it was more of always talking about, you're asking somebody, what's your experience about the NSAS? And they are unconsciously, I would put, most of them talking about the socioeconomic challenge. It is not somebody pointing to the explicitness of their experience on the street of how police has brutalized them. But this constant unconscious recollection of the retrospective memory, where we're coming from, implicitly. So that I looked at, and I argued, like in the forthcoming paper in memory studies, that it is not necessarily about the explicitness of memory, the sights, the sound, the tangibility, but about the unconscious recollection of my participant in their struggle and survival. And when you talk about your question about the place of memory in trying to navigate this socioeconomic challenge, of course, in Nigeria, like I said, the issue of socioeconomic challenge, poverty, unemployment, and corruption has been so endemic. For instance, there are some data from the screenshot I had where a participant was drawing our attention to a 1985 embezzlement of a huge fund by the then head of state, which was a military head of state, but was the civilian head of state during the NSAS movement. So they tried to bring his deed back then in 1985 to the present socioeconomic challenge. It was like, okay, saying that President Buhari has not only engendered freedom of speech, police brutality as a president, but before now, he has put us in this position. So there's this constant recollection of retrospective memory, where we're coming from to the present struggle, which I also describe as a continuum. Because with all these practices, like I said, the participant keep asking questions like anticipatorily, when would Nigeria be better? When? But drawing all these practices of the past into the present, I argue it's like a way to still tell the government that it did not start today. You still have to do what you have to do for the people of the country to live a better life. For instance, during the process, during the peak of the movement, people were placing side by side the cost of living, the cost of some items in Nigeria to the present cost during the NSAS movement. For instance, you see a bag of rice that used to go for, let's assume about $5 5 years ago. Then during the protest, people were putting it 5 years ago with the present price during the peak of the protest, like $25, saying this is where we find ourselves. So still drawing their experience, the living costs from 5 years ago to the present socio-economic struggle amidst the NSAS protest, still bring the place of memory in trying to let the government know, in trying to put our foot on ground to say, oh, this is what is happening in the country, and we need to bring the cost of living down. So, and in terms of unemployment, of course, some of my interlocutors, of course, will trace the narrative of having graduated for more than 5 to 6 years ago before getting a job. Like I opined in the screenshot from the track of Burna Boy, where he said that you no go get job if you don't know a godfather. Like you won't have a job if you don't know a godfather. So tying it to my interlocutors, one who narrated their experience of graduating 5 years ago without a job, it's like the artistic work of Burna Boy, which is there on Spotify and some other platform, still bring this consciousness to the government and to the ordinary people in the country to still agitate for a better living in the country. I believe I was able to answer your question a little bit.
Thank you. Pablo?
Hello all. Well, my name is Pablo. I'm from Brazil, and I have a question to Paula. So Argentina, of course, is a notable example, especially in Latin America, for the diversity of organizations, rituals, demonstrations, performances. But there's this prevalence, as you said, in the memory of the dictatorship. And that's also the case in Brazil. I believe that that's the case in Argentina. A prevalence of the repression, of the memory of the repression against political opponents, mainly middle-class white activists. And even the mothers are no exception of that, right? And as you said, disappearment was a big part of the repression, but it was not all of it. So I think that's a very interesting take that your collective, your organization expresses, calling for alternative sites, neighborhood memories. And I would like to ask, if do people from the outside express that? Do they express some kind of surprise or curiosity, for example, for that kind of approach, or is it just seen as the same approach as other kind of memory activisms? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Muito obrigada. Yes, it's very interesting. We had many different reactions of people. Usually, well, it depends on different situations and different neighborhoods of the city. That has a lot to do with that. Maybe posh, like more like richer or more upper middle class neighborhoods, there's usually not as such welcoming reaction when we are when these actions are taking place, these interventions. But there's a variety of different situations, and usually people are surprised by it, and they stay to see what's going on. At least they ask and they shows curiosity. So in a way, the objective, which is the main objective, of course, there are many of these actions, that it's activating that territory as a territory of memory. It does work. At least it creates also a question. The idea is to do activities in these neighborhoods with people that maybe they are not going to the main march that it's occurring downtown, and we are bringing some memory of this time to them. And it's usually like it's very, I don't agree also exactly with this word, but it's very effective in that way. It does fulfill that objective. At least people are curious. They see the tile, maybe this memory paved thing that was on the floor, they maybe had never noticed it, and they do, and it creates something there. And it has happened that after that, other people connect with, they ask us to make more tiles, to make more of these paving stones from other people that they know that they're missing, either from that neighborhood, from their schools, work, etc. So it does create a resonance in the territory. But well, there's everything also going on. Thank you for the question. I think I tried to answer.
Thanks, Paula. I like this idea of activating the territory as a territory of memory. So it kind of has this kind of transformative power. We probably have time for one short question, if anyone has a little one that they want to slip in. If not, then I'll start wrapping things up. And yeah, I wanted to wrap up also with this quotation from the special issue in which Red Chigi questions the idea of an activist turn and writes about whether or not we can think of the activist turn a little bit more like an orientation. And thinking along with Sarah Ahmed, they write, how can cultural memory scholars nurture a social justice orientation through their work? And I think that this question of how to nurture social justice orientation is something that in different ways, these three presentations have been kind of skirting today. So before I thank everyone for attending and the dMSA, I also just want to plug part 2 of these events, which will take place on the 7th of March at the same time. And this time we'll have 4 presenters who will also be early career researchers from the Memory and Activism Working Group, who'll be working closer to the kind of subject of memory activism or memory in activism. So hopefully see you all there. And before that, we will have at least one, but probably more, of our working group reading groups. If you aren't on the listserv, you can access the listserv through the link that I've just sent in the chat, and join for any of the reading groups that you'd like to come. The next one we have planned is on Friday the 19th of December from 15:30 to 1700 CET, and that one will be on the new publication Museums, Archives and Protest Memory, written by Joanne Gard-Hansen and Red Chidji, and Red will be joining us for that session. So please feel free to sign up to the list. Well, it said it's failed to send, but hopefully someone can send it on.
Clara, Clara, sorry, could you paste the link in the Q&A so everybody can see it?
In the Q&A. Okay, I'll
Yes.
put it in the Q&A. That's the right place, isn't it? There we go. Okay, it's ready for you to publish it. This complicated screening process. So hopefully see many of you there. And if not, see you on the 7th of March. And I'd like to extend a really warm thank you to all of the presenters and to the dMSA for organising it, and have a good rest of your Fridays, whatever time it may be where you are. Thank you.